This is the Blueprint Podcast, bringing you the latest in cyber defense and security operations from top Blue Team leaders. Blueprint is brought to you by the SANS Institute and is hosted by SANS Senior Instructor John Hubbard. And now, here's your host, John Hubbard.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Blueprint Podcast. My name is John Hubbard, and I'm your host. And again, with us for Maroon Shirt Day, if you're watching on YouTube, we have our three amazing guest hosts: Kathryn Knerler, Ingrid Parker, and Carson Zimmerman. In this episode, what we're going to be talking about is communication. Last time we talked about kind of the tools of the SOC and more the technology piece, but there's a human part that comes into the SOC as well, right? People, process, and technology. And so this chapter, chapter 9, is going to bring us to talking about communicate clearly, collaborate often, and share generously. And so, as we all know, right, when we're trying to communicate in normal life, in business, in all kind of respects, often when there's a problem, communication is the heart of that problem, right? So this is going to be something I'm sure that's going to be very, very important for everyone to hear, even though we probably aren't going to be talking about packet captures and things like that, right? A whole different dimension that is equally as important to get correct. So to start us off, who'd like to kick off with kind of a little bit of an intro to the section and why this was in the book?
So as we were outlining this version of the book, we were in rooms, we had whiteboards, we were putting up all of these different ideas. And this and actually the next strategy on metrics were two that just kept popping up in like, oh, well, it could go here or it could go there, or it's part of this. And we realized that these were things that are critically important to the SOC and the SOC success, but they kind of transcend any one of the other strategies that we were looking at. And we thought it was really important to just bring that out, highlight it, put some thought behind, what do we think? What have we experienced in this space? And especially, there was a point in time when SOCs were kind of relegated to the basement of an office and you never heard from them. And, if you said SOC, people thought of different compliance, or they thought of what they put on with their tennis shoes or whatever. Like your CISO, your CIO had no idea what you were talking about. But the SOCs have really evolved. They've come out. We talked about this, earlier in terms of like they're really a business and a mission enabler at this point, which means they are ideally having a seat at the table in more and more conversations within your business, across industries, with other constituents, everything else. And so we really wanted to highlight all the different ways that the SOC gets engaged within its own teams, with other teams, wherever you need to have that kind of presence and understanding of what the SOC is. So
you mentioned giving the SOC a seat at the table. Where do you think, as a kind of industry and as a profession, security teams are in 2023 in terms of asking for that seat at the table and being able to communicate at the higher level with a board or with kind of the other C-suite as compared to where we've been in the past?
I'll share a story. I remember a presentation I went to. I think this was like DEF CON in like 2008. And this one person got up on the stage, and it was the title of the presentation was all about industrial control system attacks. And he's like, and the whole presentation, which was a half an hour, was about all the things that like room in, and like someone thought a thing happened in one place no one's ever really actually seen an actual ICS SCADA and attack. We're like, well, I think this is a problem, but whoever knows when it's going to become news. And like those days are so behind us. None of us have to worry about the C-suite being aware of security and aware of cyber threats. Rather, I think a big piece of it has to do with how do we funnel that awareness towards something that benefits us and benefits who we're protecting. That's my piece of this.
Yeah, and I think the communication shifted when we started speaking some of the language of executives. So when you start talking about reputations and money lost and revenue and intellectual property disappearing out of your business, that's when it got the attention of executives, and several very large incidents that hit large companies, I think triggered some of that awareness for us. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes a large event to put us on the map. So now we have the opportunity to use it as a platform for good, right?
Never let a good incident go to waste, as they say.
That's right. That's right.
So
exactly.
What I'm hearing is success is possible, right, in this, because we have now the kind of credibility to say like, hey, this is a real problem. We've all seen the headlines and all of that sort of thing. So when it comes to successful communication in this chapter and the way you kind of broke it down, I love the kind of way you broke it down into the various different aspects and ways of communication, and then the groups that you're communicating with. So you kind of got into who needs to be informed and how are you going to collaborate and how are you going to share, and then how is that going to happen within the SOC and other security professionals inside the org. How is that going to happen with the constituency, and how is that going to work with the greater cybersecurity community? So I figure we'll kind of walk through each of those things. Talking about the SOC specifically, where should we start with? What are we looking to achieve with communication with maybe other analysts or managers or just the actual core security operations team?
Yeah, I think you actually very nicely covered table 22 there with your introduction question. And yeah, so within the SOC itself, that's certainly where you want to start with your information and informing. So coming up with reports for each other so that you know what's going on, and for your folks above you, so your stakeholders, and being able to brief out, that's informing who these folks are and, what's going on. And then informing people of the broader community. So it's more of a one-way. You're informing people. It's not as much of a two-way conversation. The next category after informed is collaboration. So that's where you work together on something. So you're sending cyber threat intelligence back and forth among your SOC members. This is where you might collaborate with other SOCs and, SOCs that are like you. So if they're in the same business you are, that's another one. And then more broadly within the community. So, outside of all your organizations altogether, because you can get some really interesting and creative ideas from other organizations. Interestingly, working outside of constituencies, you will get competitors who will work with each other during an incident now, which is, I think, over the last 10 years has become more prevalent. I think that when we're all being attacked by the same adversaries, somehow competing for business and revenue becomes a little bit secondary during an incident. So that's been pretty cool for security operations anyway. And then the final area is sharing. So just sharing is caring, and being able to provide your information to others so that they can grow and learn. So when mentoring staff within the SOC, helping them to grow along, that's certainly where I am in my career now. I think this podcast is a great example of that. All of us are giving back at this point and trying to share what we know, hopefully so people will take it and build on it and get better than we are, right? So those are the three areas.
Breakdown. Oh, Carson, we're going to add to that?
Yeah, I was gonna offer 2 points there. One of them is I would encourage the audience, the readers, to think about this space, and we broke it down in table 22 here, both during a major incident and during what I'll politely refer to as peacetime. So think about your mental model in terms of communication, collaboration, sharing across the SOC, inside the SOC, with your stakeholders and with the broader community, both in the context of during a major incident and then, not during a major incident. And that might make you think, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Otherwise, the other reason why we put this chapter where we did in the book actually goes right off of one of the last things we said in the previous strategy, and that is don't let the SOC become a black hole of data. It has a lot to offer others, and one of the messages we'll offer you during the strategy today is that the SOC gains tremendous impact and tremendous support when it democratizes its data estate.
Yeah. So if we're going to get into like specifics on the way that the SOC is getting that done, let's take the team switching over and going to a shift changeover meeting, right? Or like a daily stand-up kind of thing. starting there, I think that's kind of the inform section, the very first part of Table 22, passing from the SOC to itself in one direction as one set goes home and one goes in, right? What are you thinking about in terms of SOCs that need to do a changeover meeting? What kind of critical information are they needing to pass between them and between shifts to be effective?
I can talk about this. And actually, this is another opportunity to talk about how my thinking has changed since 10 strategies. And one of the things that I expressed concern about, veiled concern, but concern nonetheless in 10 strategies was, how do you effectively hand off cases from one analyst to a next in some kind of follow the sun situation, which I think is a very good example to instruct us on how we can do, case handoff. And there's a lot of context that goes into cases and in working those cases and even that much more in a major incident. In fact, in major incidents in large organizations like Fortune 500, et cetera, that incident response and investigation apparatus can be absolutely sprawling and yield copious amounts of data and notes and queries and other such things in a very short period of time. So when I think about handoff, I actually do very much think that follow the sun is possible, whether you're doing it 212s or 3/8 or some other model that works for you. And there's two essential components that go into it. One is a written record of, how we got to where we are right now, or at least the recent, developments in terms of what were the queries that went into what was done, what were the data produced from that, and what conclusions have we drawn from that. In so doing, I'll offer one of my favorite quotes in all of security operations. Actually came from Colin Powell. He used it many times. And his quote was something to the effect of, tell me what you know, tell me what you don't know, tell me what you think, make sure I know the difference. And it's utterly critical for us to remember that. And in the context of shift pass down, right? Case handover, et cetera. Because people often get them muddled and then they get confused and badness ensues. So the first piece is having all that written down, and the second piece is warm handoff. It is possible to do shift handover in a way that is asynchronous, meaning no handoff meeting. And in what I'll refer to as peacetime, that might be okay. But during a major incident, doing warm handoff from one follow the sun to the next, or from the folks who went home at the night to the folks who showed up in the morning. It's very important to ensure that stuff doesn't get dropped.
Yeah. So here's the thing about, So Carson, is talking about very large organizations and some of that. So I wanted to highlight, even when you're really tiny, if you're one or two people that are doing incident response, if you have an incident, it is super important to communicate so that there isn't just one person who knows what's going on. Because I guarantee you're going to be hunted down in the middle of the night if you're the only one that knows something, just speaking for a friend. So really important to, hand things off. If it's the middle of the night, even telling, the security organization, if there is one, the overnight guards, hey, we got something going on. Shouldn't be anything, just call me if there's, something really bad, that kind of thing. So you can even do a handoff, a warm handoff, so to speak, with a non-cybersecurity organization if you're the only person. But no matter what, you shouldn't be the only one that knows something.
I was thinking about, shift change and passing information around, and just keeping in mind that ideally, you have a case management system, or you have your SIEM, or you have these other tools that are capturing a lot of this information that make it available to people what they need over time. And you want to set your meetings and your communications up in this place to be really focused on what does somebody need to know that they can't get from those systems. So is there a outstanding phone call that you're just waiting on a response from? Is there an anomaly? Like, I was looking at this data and I haven't figured out what's going on with it. Can somebody go take a look at that? Is there hey, we're missing this data, or we're waiting on, engineers to do something, or whatever it is? Those are the things that I think can be really impactful during these discussions, because they're driving what does that next shift need to do, rather than here's a history of all the stuff like, hey, we took care of this, we closed it out, it was a phishing email, whatever else. Like, that's not the place to spend the time. because your systems ideally are going to be capturing that. And so really think about how you can focus those meetings, keep them pretty short, because at the end of a shift, people are just like, they're done, they're burnt, they're ready to go. They have other plans in mind. And when you're just getting started, you don't have all the context yet. Like you haven't logged in, maybe you haven't like sat down and started to look at data. So if you try and put too much on top of somebody, they're like, eyes are going to glaze over. They won't remember everything. So try and keep them short, try and keep them focused, and try and talk about the exceptions rather than all of the things.
Yeah, I love all that. That's,
happen.
I think, really, really good advice. Looking for what your systems aren't going to tell you, and how much, how confident you are in the things how you got there, all that stuff. Love all of that. What about peacetime, as we call it, right? If there's nothing major going on, what is the SOC talking or passing really to the next shift? Is it situational awareness? Is it health of what's going on in the environment? Like, what other kinds of info might otherwise be passed back and forth when there isn't a major problem?
There is no SOC that doesn't have stuff going on all the time, because it's always about how are you improving? What intelligence came in today? What's going on with that latest engineering plan? Maybe you're trying to figure out like, hey, we need to go write detectors for these new attack techniques. Like, what's the status of projects comes up a lot of times. If you're not maybe having a bunch of incidents that are coming in, you're still, I personally have not worked in any SOC where there aren't more projects going on than you possibly have time and people for. And so all of those things are going to come up as well. Even if the actual alert queue was pretty quiet that day, the SOC is almost never quiet.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest there's also something we often call an ops tempo for a SOC, and that can kind of lay out your communication strategy. You would want to set that up during peacetime, right? So having daily meetings, I don't, as Ingrid said, I don't think I've ever worked in a SOC where we didn't have daily meetings. We didn't always have incidents going on, but we always had something going on. And you want to know what the teams are working on. So like a daily stand-up meeting, like a 5-10 minute, 15-minute, whatever it is, depends on the size of your organization. Just here's what's going on. Here's what we're working. Here are the major projects. And these are the people doing them. That kind of discussion to start the day, because people then feel the context of what's going on in the SOC. Is it a very busy day? Is it a quiet day and we're just getting to do tools and build things and create scripts and do that kind of work? Or are we working an incident?
We could probably have a whole blueprint episode just on how to do a good ops stand-up. I'll offer just a couple points. And also mention something in terms of a medium-sized SOC. Having a pass-down log from shift to shift or day to day is really helpful, especially when you've got, as we were saying, just some things that are in your case tracking system, but it's all the things that weren't that could go in your pass-down log. Like, I saw this weird thing. You should follow up on that. It hasn't made a case yet. Ops stand-ups should be short. And if they're getting really long, one of the things to think about is how do we break that up, particularly if you're a bigger shop, or if they're really long, why are they really long? And should we be talking about some of those things in a different forum on a different cadence? One of the other things to think about ops stand-up is that it shouldn't just feel like everyone's talking to the SOC manager. Though that is superficially true, at least some of the time. One of the ways to know you're doing a good ops stand-up is that there are other people in the room who are like, oh, yeah, that's like really important. Like, oh, thank you for that, or whatever. That's how you know that or one of the ways you know how it's.
Yeah, I like that. There's a lot of good tips and tricks in there. One of the other things I was kind of thinking of looking for hints on is, everyone struggles with the problem of SOC, like tribal knowledge, as we call it, right? How do we pass information forward and not backward in time, unless you can figure out how to do that, but forward into the future amongst people? So when there's new team members and that new experienced person is left, how do we make sure that the SOC persistent memory, right, as you've called it, some of those sorts of things? Is there any kind of system or tools or other kind of organization techniques you've seen work for that?
This goes back to whatever the tool is that everybody will log into anyway is going to be the right tool to use. Because if you try and create some elaborate knowledge management system and it's someplace completely different that you have to go, it's not going to be comfortable. This is also a place where leadership can get really involved with expectations, because if somebody discovers something, or figures out a new kind of query or whatever it is that you want to capture, And there's not a level of accountability for actually then taking that and saying, oh, did you put that on this page? Did you put it in your wiki? Did you put it on your blog? Did you put it in your Confluence page? Whatever it is, it doesn't happen. And this is not a natural thing because that ops tempo, it's going to keep people moving. Hey, there's the next thing. So this has to be a kind of a culture driven piece of it's really important. And I'm going to give you the time to go document whatever it is you just discovered. And the expectation when it comes to performance reviews, everything else is, did you document? Did you put it in there? And trying not to make that documentation something that's like, oh, so-and-so person, does that really well. So we're always going to have them go do it, because then that person is going to get so frustrated. Like they might do it. They might be okay, like the first time. And then the 20th time they're asked to do something, they're like, I can't say no, but I really hate this. So try and make it something that everybody does. It's consistent. It's just part of your routine basis. And it's using whatever system you happen to have in place that people are comfortable in. One thing that I find is we really try and have a place that's a more casual, like you can just put something in. And if you want to put a meme in, if you want to put funky colors, if you want to do whatever, like it's much more of that graffiti board, like just put something down. And then people are just kind of like, yeah, this is a fun place. I'm putting a set of notes. And then you make sure that is not the place that your CISO goes to look for information because, you want it to be, hey, this is just our team is talking amongst ourselves. And this is why in the chapter, the strategy, we talk about the difference of the different pieces you want to communicate and what you want to do within your team and how you want to set that up and allow people to share that information is and should be different than when you need to formalize it. And so you have to think about those different layers of you just want to capture something, you just want to make it available. Who is going to have access to it? What are they going to do with it? How formal do you need to be? And so all of that comes into play.
I'm going to pile on. The answer to your question, John, succinctly, and Ingrid was reading my mind as she often does, is 3 words: standard operating procedures. Everyone in the SOC must be accountable to both reading and writing them on a cadence that will generally feel daily. And I don't care who you are. I don't care how long you've been doing it or how senior you are. I am reading or writing an SOP almost daily. And I've been doing this for 20 years. And the reason why that's the case is that there's too many different incident types and too many scenarios and too many old things for us to keep it all in our minds. And, we've got to write that down amongst other things to support not only, new people coming in, people leaving, is also consistency and predictability in the organization. And also to ensure that, the operational principles promulgated by management are heard and understood and followed by people elsewhere so that we're all on the same page. So updating SOPs is something that should be democratized. It should not just be one person. It shouldn't just be a quote unquote tech writer. It shouldn't just be a lead. It should be literally everyone. And one of the other things, and this becomes increasingly challenging as a SOC gets older, SOC gets bigger, is having a designated place for the SOPs that is not the same place you puked a query yesterday. Because when God help you, you're searching for an SOP, you want just the SOP and not 3,762 different emails that someone dumped in a OneNote last year. That's crazy making.
Yeah. And I actually wanted to go back to your thing too. You're talking about persisting history, which I like. And I think that using our construct, it's about sharing, working with those people who are new. I think the sharing comes down to at least start them on the incidents and the interesting things that have happened in the past. And if you don't have any incidents, that in itself is really very interesting, right? At this point of where we are. So, bringing people up to speed and sharing TTPs that we have, how do we share with other folks and kind of just bringing them along. And how did we discover it? Because that's always the hardest part of any incident is how did we find it to begin with, and giving them tips on where do you find breadcrumbs and where do you look and how do I start if I'm looking for something malicious? So that sharing column is where I would start with someone new in particular.
Yeah. And that's a great point. If you go and look at that table, we tried to give examples that were not only just written communications, but really talked about the fact that in this strategy, we're thinking about this, like, how do you communicate during a meeting? How do you mentor somebody? How do you, go out and do a podcast? How do you do all these different things? And that this is really about all those different forms of communications and all the different ways that you might want to document or engage with somebody. And so certainly within your own SOC, especially that mentorship, that sharing piece that Kathryn's talking about is huge. And you need that, both the, hey, I'm going to put it on paper so I don't lose it from my mind, as well as the, hey, I'm going to talk to somebody and I'm going to work with them and I'm going to help them understand what's actually happening in the space beyond what we just
so a lot
put
of
on
different
piece of
dimensions to consider there, right? Formality and usability and fun, right? You picture with your keyboard cats and all sorts of fun stuff that you can throw in there. I love all of that, right? There's a lot of different jobs to be done, and each one of them kind of has its own spot and its own kind of optimized task and place that thing has to happen. Good stuff. What about communicating with other related security teams? So like the CTI team, right? When the SOC sees an incident, obviously they got to get some information. When they get some information, they got to pass it to the SOC and the IR team and everyone else, and like pen testers and red teamers. What are we thinking about for methods of communication with those types of teams?
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this episode, then you're undoubtedly interested in building the strongest security operations team that you can. For those who want to go even deeper, did you know that SANS has not one, but 2 courses that cover security operations centers as well? For the leaders, managers, and directors out there, my co-author Mark Orlando and I offer 551, Building and Leading Security Operations Centers. This course covers building your team, your physical and virtual workspace, getting the right data into your tools, and then focusing on security priorities through everyday execution of important security tasks and building the best SOC team possible. For the technical practitioners out there, my course Sec 450, Blue Team Fundamentals, Security Operations and Analysis is designed to cover everything you need to jump in being the best SOC analyst that you can be. We cover important data types, SOC tools, security logs, malware, analysis technique, automation, and much, much more. In addition, if you want to prove you can deliver the best on any security team, both courses have an accompanying certification available from GIAC. That's the GSOM for 551 and the GSOC for 450. Check out both courses and free demos available on the SANS website. You can get registered today for an in-person course at one of our many events, or go to On Demand and take either class anywhere at your own pace. Thanks for listening.
Okay, this is one of my very favorites. I have lots of stories and I have feelings to go with Carson's. I love Carson's. I have feelings about this. Cyber threat intelligence, CTI, and we talked about it in Strategy 6. That is one of those areas where people did not like to share for a very long time. It was about, I'm going to keep all my indicators and all my stuff to myself. And the world just opened up when we all started sharing. It, didn't happen all that long ago, maybe 10 years max, of when we actually started sharing, hey, I saw this weird thing. And it was because we were having our lunch handed to us, right? So when we started comparing notes and hey, we got this thing, we started putting together pictures that we were all experiencing together. And that's how we were, able to track some of the APTs, is working across various cyber threat intelligence and incident response, because it would be 2 different groups sometimes, so bringing those organizations together and including counterintelligence types of folks. So it was traditionally folks that didn't work together before, and they have different languages, by the way. So you're asking, how do you summarize and what do you summarize? We're starting to come together. Well, we're not starting. We're coming together on language when it's around incidents, and we use TTPs and we use what are the motives? What are they trying to gain? So we've adopted some intelligence kinds of things. What is an adversary looking at? So over time, we've shifted in how we share and who we share with, especially when it comes to
credit,
intelligence.
right? That's been probably one of the biggest things. Like, the attack has caught fire like crazy, right? And now we have a common language, we have a common body of knowledge. It's got groups, it's got software, it's got campaigns now, right? All that kind of stuff just makes it so much easier to start out with this and have a base of stuff and language to go off of, and then let alone kind of work to, as a community, talk about how to evolve that body of knowledge. As a SOC is working through an incident, what are the types of things that need to be shared specifically between, hey, this incident just finished, feeding back to a CTI team, and then in the other direction to help the SOC kind of catch stuff better the next time?
I'm going to offer a piece of this. when I think about CTI teams, I think about them being inside the SOC. So I would challenge the audience to think about the CTI team as a team that is with you during major incidents, in the sense, and that's for a lot of reasons. I think about their analytic technique. I think about their data access. And I think about, the way they talk about findings. If we've got a major incident, it involves a named or well attributed actor, or in fact, they are probably maybe the ones helping with the attribution. Applying those same thoughts here, alongside the investigators, the responders, the triage analysts, et cetera, I think is still very important. And I can't recall a major incident I've ever been in where the intel team wasn't alongside for that major incident.
Even as close as the teams can be, though, it is important to keep in mind that they somewhat speak different languages and they have different intents for what they're trying to do. And, thinking about what are you passing back and forth, if you're the SOC, you need to help the intelligence team actually know what you care about and the types of things that you want to be looking for. Because if they go off and they read an intelligence report that's analyzing a piece of malware and they're providing you, all of this information about what's happening at this low level, and you're like, we don't have a malware analyst on our team. That's not the level we work at. Not important to us. We can't capture that information. Like, they're spending their time on something that's not as valuable. Or if you don't have a particular piece of software in your environment and they're like, oh my goodness, this is happening and everybody cares about it. And you're like, and we don't, because we don't run that. So it's really, the SOC can provide those kind of, help with those intelligence requirements, passing over what they actually are interested in, what's happened before, what they've seen. The intelligence team can help characterize that and find new information to support it. And then the intelligence team feeds that back in and says, hey, have you looked for this? Have you seen that? This is something new that this particular adversary group does. And then you work with them and you create that cycle of, oh, so let's create a detector that can actually go look for that. Oh, look, we found this. What else should we be looking for? Let's talk to the intelligence team. How does this adversary group work? Okay, well, that's how that group works. So let's go see if we can find this next thing. And so it's really, I think, especially with CTI, but even with your engineering teams, everything else, it's an iterative loop where you have to figure out how to have a continual cycle. And ideally, how to do this at the lowest level possible. I've seen some failures where organizations say, okay, we don't want the analysts, taking their heads up or being, bothered with having all these small conversations. We're just have the managers talk to each other and they're do a routine sync and they're do something else. But all the creativity and all the good ideas really comes from the different analyst teams or the analysts and the engineer teams or whatever, working the things out and figuring out what they need to do to solve the problem. With just the manager saying, okay, how do we facilitate? How do we make sure that we're going to meet goals? How do we make sure that, you've got what you need to do this? And it doesn't, devolve into, okay, somebody spent 8 hours on a shift just chatting about whatever. But for the most part, you want to just kind of get out of the way and let these teams talk to each other and create the space for them to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I'll give a real concrete example. We brought it up a little bit in the CTI chapter, and that's around attribution. If you talk to most security operations folks, the ones doing the incident response, there is a tendency to want to just move on to the next thing. There's also a tendency with real nascent organizations to play the whack-a-mole. I'm just going to block this IP address. And so we try to really encourage people to listen to intelligence and listen to other people so you can get out in front of that whack-a-mole, because otherwise you're just shutting stuff down blindly and you're not going to get anyone out of your networks and systems by just shutting things down. So intelligence and that watching and that whole balance that we were talking about in some of our earlier strategies really comes to a head here with communication. It's understanding that Intel has a different mission, but they speak, they're speaking about attribution. They're trying to understand who the adversaries are, why they're coming after you, and anticipating. A SOC can't really anticipate all by themselves because they just see what's already in the networks by definition, all the stuff that's in your systems and cloud. So yeah, they have different missions and different reasons for being, but communication is where they come together to bring different perspectives.
One of the things that was said along the way there that kind of caught my attention was Ingrid had mentioned you got to let the CTI team know what you want as the SOC, right? But in the spirit of your collaborate piece here, being a two-way road, I have not been a threat intelligence analyst, and I know that some of you have sat in that chair much more seriously than I ever have, for sure. So from the CTI team perspective, what do they want to receive from the SOC? And what's going to be like, the desired format of that or the format of the question? Is there any kind of guidance there you can give people in a SOC?
Yeah, so I would start. So both teams, the SOC and the CTI, need to know what's important to the business, as we were talking about in Strategy 6. So what are we protecting and where is it? The CTI team needs to understand, okay, so you have this intellectual property and this kind of business. Here are similar things and similar adversaries that are going after it in other businesses, right? So that's what they're looking to connect. The security folks can provide that CTI analyst with, here's the kinds of things we're seeing. Here's the TTPs we've had before. So that's the kind of stuff the SOC should be feeding to the CTI folks, right? So here's what it's looked like before. Here's what we found. Threat hunting is kind of where this stuff comes together, so the threat hunter has to understand both worlds.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of those spots where it's like you're not using the signatures that you already know or like, oh, that's the hash I'm looking for, right? It's like, well, they kind of do things like this. We don't have that. And so you got to lean on CTI for what to look for and then play a little bit of analyst to like dig through all the data. Yeah, that's a good call. And kind of, I hadn't really thought about it like that before, but that is kind of a middle ground between just reactive and purely kind of like the CTI piece of it. So yeah, I like that. Yeah.
If I could add one more thing there, it's what I've wanted when I've been on CTI times is feedback on the products the CTI team is giving to the SOC. Mm-hmm. That is the number one thing, is the CTI team's feeling like, oh, I've written up this report. Was it too long? Was it too short? Did it have the right information? Am I hitting the mark? Are these the types of things you care about? And if the SOC just is kind of taking that and either just, either doing something, not doing something, whatever, but isn't providing that feedback on the product, that's going to do you no good. And so taking that time to actually sit down and say, okay, what did we like about this? What were we able to use? Is there a different format you could put it in? How could we make this more automated? Hey, prose doesn't really work for us. Hey, if you could actually tell us talk about the attack technique that went with this particular thing, make sure that's included or not, like whatever it is you need, that feedback from the SOC to the CTI team is critical to you actually improving the quality of what you can do with that CTI.
I'd offer here, as we're talking through this, people might be thinking about really long Word documents or Google documents or whatever that someone spends a lot of time polishing and putting pictures in and drawing pictures and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things people, and that all has its place. I love reading myself a really good Intel report that's 50 pages long on my favorite actor. I would also challenge the audience to think about this in the context of documents or things captured in another electronic form that are shorter, terser, a whole lot less finished, and thrown together in a matter of minutes or perhaps a couple hours, and quickly thrown over the fence, perhaps through some kind of tip. In fact, one of the ways to think about, do you need a tip, is if your SOC is engaged in the kinds of conversations we've been describing over the last 5 minutes or so, you probably need a tip. And if it feels like you're writing 50-page long papers and throwing them over a brick wall and not getting a lot of interaction with them, you might want to rethink your communication style. Yeah.
And one more thing, since we're on the subject of collaborating with CTI and SOCs, I think the way I look at it is security operations are focused on the past. It's stuff that's already happened. It's already there somewhere. We just have to find it. CTI is focused on the future. It's like, what's going to happen? What they want to ideally anticipate what could happen next. It's a very, very tough job if a CTI analyst is doing their job. But just think about it. Having a CTI analyst tell you what's already happened is not as helpful as, hey, this group is coming after banks and you're next. That's useful, right? That's the ideal for collaboration
perfect.
between
Love
the
that.
two.
If we're expanding the circle beyond kind of security teams and talking about communicating either with the greater IT organization or the business and constituency at large, what are some of the things a security team and a SOC, however we kind of bound the SOC, because we kind of switch back and forth between saying is CTI part of it or not part of it, security people, the security group. How do we need to, what do we need to think about with communicating with the larger constituency?
I think you start with just what does the SOC do? What services do they offer? Way back when in the early strategies, we were talking about you're going to create a charter. You're going to talk about, what the scope of the SOC responsibilities are. And basically having that, knowing if it's, a formal service catalog, if it's just letting people know like what data you're collecting, what are the likelihood of, they're going to be involved with an incident, all of those types of things. You really want to start establishing what does the SOC do for the constituency and communicating that so they know what to expect if they get a call from you. And so really it's start there, and then you can build to talking about, okay, so what's new? What's changed? What should you know about the environment? Where have we gone? But it starts really simply with just once you start leaving the security teams, although people are much more cybersecurity savvy than they were 5 years, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was, many of them still don't know what we actually do. And so you have to educate your community on what the SOC does.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. My goal in communicating to non-security people is not to have them look at me like I'm the Grim Reaper. Every time I come, their way, they're like, oh, something is definitely wrong. And the way to counter that is to communicate during peacetime, as we were saying earlier, make your way outside of the dark rooms and go and talk and, just kind of talk to people, figure out what's important to you. What are you doing? Have a different kind of relationship than just the Grim Reaper. Something's wrong.
I'll offer 3 short comments here. One of them is I will never forget, calling somebody, walking in somebody's office, whatever, VoIP calling them, et cetera. And saying, who you're from and like, why are you talking to them? It's like people just love it when you tell them that they have to back away from their computer and they're not getting anything more done that afternoon. They're just absolutely thrilled. Just kidding. So that I've still got that ringing through my mind. Ingrid's absolutely right. Having that, who are we? What do we do? Kind of 45-minute, half hour, whatever it is, to help people understand and what value is the SOC bringing. Love doing those briefings, love keeping them fresh. The SOC should tie into the annual cybersecurity training for the constituency so that people know, what button to smash when they think they've got a spam or a phish or whatever. That's a big piece, and having them being able to go to that front door where they can understand, when and why and to contact the SOC, whether they're ordinary users or major system owners or what have you. And then following all of that, for a much smaller segment of the constituency that are kind of what I'll refer to as high needs users, high needs services, high needs stakeholders, I think about much more routine contact around some of the things the SOC is doing, which we can talk about whenever you're ready.
So the thing I'm thinking here along with this is with the Grim Reaper talk is any specific tactics or things that you've seen used to give feedback to users when they're doing well, right? A lot of times it's either they show up with bad news, right? The security team does, or the average user's like, yeah, it's the SOC. I hit the button and they're the people that get it, but like, I don't really know if I'm doing it right, right? How do we use the carrot and not only the stick is maybe another way of asking that question.
Yeah. I mean, one of the simplest things is, I've worked at a couple places where we've had, hey, you've got the button built into your email. Oh, I think this is spam. I think this is whatever. And make sure you've got a response to it. Make sure that you give even just that automated thank you for sending this. This is the next set of actions we're going to take. And it's an opportunity to also educate, and you can provide a little bit more information. Like if you also see this or you see something else, you could do X, Y, Z. And then if you do find something, it's okay to pick up the phone and call somebody and actually say, hey, you submitted this. I had a couple questions about it. And okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And then you move on. And so those kinds of just quick touch point communications, you're not going to do that with everybody in your constituency, but that person is going to say, oh yeah, if they're in person or they're on Slack or they're doing whatever, they're going to talk to their friends and just say, oh yeah, I reached out to security and they actually got in touch with me or something. So it's making sure that you aren't that black hole. Anytime that person has a reason to call you, text you, email you, drop you a message in your, platform of choice, that there is some sort of response that acknowledges what they thank you for the time, and here's what you can expect from us. Either you're not going to hear from us again, or you will hear from us, and this is the time frame, and this is what we might also need. So just really making that very clear can be really helpful.
Yeah, and when you have really limited resources, you'll have things. There's this phenomena called SOC fans. You got some of your users are real fans of security. They just really want to be deputized. So I'm always a fan of, okay, deputize them, and there'll be those folks that, report a couple times a week at least, right? Hey, I found this thing. And so certainly giving those kinds of folks a little bit of attention is a good thing, and rewarding them for that. It's like, yeah, look, hey, we took what you said, whether we knew it or not, and kind of bringing them along on the journey with you. It's a way of expanding your SOC too a little bit, and using some of these power users.
I want to make a comment on something Ingrid said before we dive into SOC fans. There's another. By the way, I'm a big fan of deputizing SOC fans.
I'm going to go back to domain.
You should, unless Kathryn gets it first. One of the other opportunities is following, or even before it's over, any major incident where the SOC engages a system or service owner, and the system or service owner shows both fellowship and genuinely helping the SOC, bottom out on an investigation or effectuate a good response, or, gain the right context they need to do either, so on and so forth. Praising those stakeholders can go a long way. And it's easy to forget, which is why I call it out.
Yeah, especially as you're preparing communications to go up. And so maybe you're talking to, a CISO, to the board, to EC, to whoever it is, C-suite, making sure that you talk about the partnerships and the people that brought in and the kind of support that they gave. Really goes a long way to making sure that people feel like they are appreciated for the time that they spent working with
absolutely.
the security
Everyone
teams.
loves, recognition for having helped out, and especially with something that significant, right? There's nothing to lose by calling out people and say this person was a huge help. They were a team player along the entire route, right? That's nothing but wins all around. In terms of going towards communication with leadership specifically, beyond just the general everyone in the constituency, we talked about getting a seat at the table, the fact that we have earned that seat at the, I'm not sure if earned is the word, or need it regardless, right? I think
we've earned it.
Yeah,
we've earned it.
That's a security podcast. We've earned the seat at the table, and therefore, when we sit down in that seat, and maybe have, whether we call it a steering committee meeting, sometimes people use that term, or other kind of, hey business, what are you doing? We're the SOC, how can we help? Kind of conversations. What are we talking about in those conversations? Is there any kind of guiding questions that you can give to people, or other kind of advice?
Recognize that those conversations need to be different than the ones you have internally, and that when you start talking about the business, you're going to be talking about risk. You're really going to be thinking about, can that organization keep doing the things that they are chartered to do? And how does the things you do help support that? As fun as it is to talk about, all the details of the latest adversary group or incidents or anything else, unfortunately, I think we've all learned over time that is not what resonates with this particular group. Now, I say that, it depends. This is where I've seen a shift, that as leaders have been moving up over the last 20 years or so, they are much more cyber savvy than they used to be. And you will on occasion find the people who really do want to dive into those details and are, open and interested in what's there, but make sure to know your audience. Figure out what they want to know, figure out the level of depth that they want to go to. Maybe that's a sidebar conversation another time, over coffee or whatever, to talk about what really happened. But really think about, what is, what are the business reasons that they care about having the SOC, and what are the kinds of disruptions, risk, things that are going to matter to them at a very high level that might cost them money, might cost them reputation, might get legal involved, anything else, and focusing on that. at the same time, figuring out how to take the opportunity to say, hey, here's the things that we've put into place, and the money that you have invested has been used in this way for this good. Because it is sometimes the SOC is all caught up in, hey, I'm just going to tell you about the bad things that happened. But you really need to also talk about, here's what was prevented, or here's what we did with the money you gave us. Here's how we're able to detect these things that we couldn't before, and make sure you're finding those success cases to talk about the power of what the team is actually doing.
Yeah. And here's what I've learned. The C-suite doesn't like stories, which I can't figure out for the life of me. I love stories. So, start at the beginning, tell me the whole story and how you got there. Engineers love to go through and walk through the whole thought process, analysts too. C-suite, they don't want to hear that. They just want to, so being able to walk in with real crisp messaging of what you really need them to come away from knowing is what I've had to do for security operations. Usually is around, I need X number of dollars. It will save this business unit from this, from being off the internet for 2 hours or whatever the real impact is, and being able to crisp it up. Super important to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important one, right? Very succinct, clear, and appropriate for the crowd, right? Conversation, unless they ask for more, in which case you still probably have to back it down a little bit. But sometimes you might want to say, well, yeah, they move from this computer to that computer, and you're not getting into virus families and all of that, but giving them the story.
Oh, I get really excited. Yeah, exactly. You want to know the details? Okay, first they did this.
Right.
But that doesn't happen a lot.
Catheryn's absolutely right. I think about, by the way, one of the ways to think about this is don't just be thinking about the people in the C-suite. Think about, mid-tier management, the stakeholders, the people who have line of sight to the lines of the business, no matter how big or small you are. And depending, if they're kind of further up, as she stated, really crisping that message up. You're going to probably have 10 or 15 minutes, if you're lucky, sometimes.
You get that much time?
What's that?
I said, you get that much time?
Sometimes. And what is the specific investment at hand? What's the specific risk? What are we doing about it? What, so what, now what, right? Things like that. I have the most productive conversations around investments, right? What are the digital investments they're making, and what are the investments we're making? And always put it in the context of their business, right? It's always in the context of, how are we driving down risk in whatever thing they care about and that they're building or selling or delivering or whatever. And if you do that, you're going to stand a much better chance.
Right. Remembering everyone's incentives and phrasing your story in terms of how it helps them get whatever it is their mission is to get, right? Whether that's keeping operations up, whether that's finance, whatever it is, right? That's one kind of principle I think that always applies really well kind of across the board in any kind of communication, right? Zooming out even further, the security team with other security teams in the community. What kind of communication are we looking to have at that level on the global scale with the other SOCs that are out there, the greater cybersecurity space?
There's so many ways this one can come into play. You can do it through formal sharing groups, ones that are industry-based, ones that are region-based, whatever it is that, kind of put some formality to it. But what I also see a lot of is analyst to analyst, kind of behind the scenes, or small team to small team, where you're building trust with somebody. And then you're like, hey, there's something going on. Let's get on the phone. Let's have a conversation. Let's share some information. I think Kathryn brought up that, there's a real difference in security operations now, where teams that might be business competitors will be SOC partners. And they will, to the extent that you're not giving away, secrets about your organization, you're still willing to share information and say, hey, this is a fight that we've all got to deal with. And so you're really thinking about, how do I put that information out so that others who have a similar interest, similar environment, similar whatever, can also take advantage of it. And so acknowledging within your SOC that you probably want to look at some of these formal mechanisms to share with other teams, but if you have analysts who've been in the community, they have created relationships, and leveraging those relationships a lot of times is, hey, did somebody else see this? Let me just send a note to my friend, and I'm going to go see what's happening. and they're going to share some behind the scenes information. And the stuff that happens that way and then happens, across Twitter and across these other places, like, honestly, before those formal reports come out that everybody can look at and say, oh, this is what's happening, there's probably been hours or days of this much more informal conversation that's gone on between analyst teams that sets people up to be trying to get ahead of whatever the adversaries are doing.
Yeah. And so
go ahead, Kathryn.
Yeah. So this sharing thing, it is around trust, right? And so when we form, what I've noticed with these informal are the best, where groups or companies or people are getting together informally, volunteering and sharing with each other. And they do it ahead of time during peacetime before there's an actual thing happening. But that trust is really key. And also value. So if you're not bringing information and data of value to an informal group where you're sharing and trusting each other, eventually you're going to get cut out. I hate to be so, brutal, but that's what happens. So, I always make it a point to bring something of value that I think I uniquely have that I can share with others so that I get good information and their value back to me.
Yeah, you got to bring beer to the party, right?
One of the
Yeah.
One of the things for socks, especially smaller socks or newer socks, they can feel like that they're quite the ugly duckling. And it can be a very isolating experience. And finding community with other socks is one of the best ways I have found to find that fellowship.
But you can't be a lurker, right, Carson? You can't be a lurker. You can't just show.
No, I was about to say, there's been whole studies done on, the best sized group for sharing. Like if it gets too big, people just lurk, and they don't contribute, and you lose the trust in the community. I've, at the risk of getting the numbers wrong, I've been in SOC communities where, it's less than a dozen SOCs to where you still have that analyst to analyst relationship, and there's no SOC that's lurking. I would also offer one of the ways to split this up is having community at like the CISO, deputy CISO, and SOC manager level, like the person who runs the whole SOC. And then also community at like the analyst to analyst level. And sometimes you may bifurcate those, and that's okay.
So earlier, what came up was, a little bit of the informal versus formal sharing, and social media being very fast versus long reports being more detailed, but a lot slower. What role do you think the social media kind of tier of communication has in, 2023 level of threat intelligence and SOC sharing?
It's good for a heads up. If nothing else, there's a lot of bluster and hype around almost everything that's cyber. There's lots of buzzwords. So one of the things I like to use social media for, and for that matter, news aggregators, and there's tremendous blur between them on purpose, is just understanding what's getting buzz, and being anticipatory about what an executive or a manager might be concerned about, even if it's not something necessarily relevant to us. And because you're always going to get, the CISO that tomorrow that says, I think you should buy a SQL server in a shade of blue because it has the most RAM. And you're like, what?
Yeah, I think with social media, it has drastically changed the landscape from, you just didn't have this ability to put out quick messages or do other things. Or honestly, I worked at SOCs where people tried to very closely hold any information that they had until they knew it was absolutely precise. And they didn't want to be responsible for putting something out that wasn't right. Or that hadn't been vetted, or that legal hadn't looked at, or all of these other things. And I think we really have, as a community, broken down some of those walls and are much more accepting of some of this earlier sharing. What that also means is, one, within your own organization, you do need to know what your responsibilities are to your parent organization in terms of sharing. What are you allowed to do? Making sure you're not, going beyond those boundaries. You're not, losing trust within your own organization. But it also means when you're consuming it, you have to be a much more critical consumer and not just take what's out there, because I've seen plenty of times when people who are very well known in the community, very good at what they do, post something, and then a couple hours later they go, oh, yep, okay, analyze this a little bit more. That actually wasn't what's going on. This is what I'm seeing here, or this was added to it. And so you have to not just take things at face value, see if they're going to be relevant to your organization, and keep up to date to see if there are updates, changes, anything else. So it just becomes a lot more dynamic to try and find that information. But it does give us early warnings in the way that we never had before.
Any other thoughts on, if you're a new SOC trying to get into this, other kind of industry groups, resources, or other things that should be shouted out that people might not know about, or any kind of advice like that?
I mean, it's not that this one isn't known about, but I was thinking about this as we were talking. If you are in a smaller SOC or a newer SOC, or you don't have as many connections in the industry, one of the best ways to start to get some is security conferences still, I think.
Yeah.
Because, if you have that opportunity, especially to go face to face and meet people and just start chatting with the person next to you, and every person you talk to is not going to be relevant to your network. But you can probably find somebody at that conference who is in the same industry, has some sort of shared history, whatever it is. That is one of the best places to start to get really, into what is happening. And so I would say start there along with anything that you can find online. Take the time. I know many analysts don't actually want to go away from their screens and they don't want to talk to people, or there's whatever else. Be awkward, go out, say hi to the person sitting next to you at that conference, find out what their history is, share something that you can share.
I have fond memories of playing Rock Band or Guitar Hero, or I've forgotten what, like at a conference with other SOC people I'd normally just see online. And I was like, wow, you're an actual person that exists in the real world. I would offer two other opportunities in addition to what Ingrid said, even though I do think conferences are probably the first that come to my mind as well. One of them is leveraging your national CERT, CERT, or some approximation thereof to help make connections for you. And if you need a list of your national CERT, go to first.org. They have a whole list of them. Or for that matter, your regional, if you're in the United States, your regional or industry-based ISAC is a way to support that. I'm also going to offer one thing that folks might not necessarily be thinking of. If you're new, you're totally lost and you're timid, believe it or not, your security vendor might be able to also connect you with people. Now, there are hazards to that, potentially who your security vendor is, but your tool vendor might be able to also connect you with some of the other people they have a relationship with.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind is it's people move around a lot in the security field. So they may be in one place now, but they're going to be in another place later. So they may not be relevant to you right at the moment. You never know when someone that you met at a conference suddenly becomes very relevant. It's running a similar SOC to what you're doing. So I always keep that in mind. Anyone in the security field, we're all moving.
As you have coworkers in one place that leave, they're going to go to another place and they can introduce you to their new coworkers if you go to the same conference or whatever it is. So yeah, I would totally echo that. Big conferences, small conferences, any conferences you can go to them, right? The first one is kind of like, oh, I don't know if it's going to be weird or not. It's amazing. Definitely, if you have not been to any security conference, go to anyone you can manage to get yourself to. Great stuff always there. All right. I think that probably wraps up for tonight. I will close on the note saying, for those who are interested in jumping in, I will put in the show notes for this episode the link to the SANS Cyber Defense Discord server and maybe a couple other ones. SANS actually has several Discord servers, one for each curriculum. So if you are a totally new, not even in the industry yet kind of person, you can jump into some of those and get into that kind of conversation as well. That's a totally open for anyone to, converse about whatever they want. Kind of resource there. So plenty of those kind of chat rooms out there. We can help you out with that one for sure. Anything else before we close it up?
I think the one thing we kind of talked around, but I would want to emphasize is take whatever knowledge you have, no matter how long you've been in this industry, you've had some experience, and share that out with others. So that might just be within your own team. That might be within your constituency. If you're, up for presenting at one of these conferences, that's what I've discovered, is that when you present at a conference, suddenly everybody, who was in that room at that conference knows you, whether that was 5 people or 500 people. Suddenly have a set of people who know your name and know something about what you're interested in. And that is one of the best ways to start making relationships and just get a conversation going. So think about all of this, of what you can also give back to the community, as well as what you need to get from the community as you're thinking about all this sharing. Yeah, you do not have
to have a world, shattering 0 day to give a presentation at a conference, right? I presented on building home labs, was my first thing I ever presented, right? So there's always someone that knows less than you, and you can serve them with any talk that you can come up with, right? And guide them on their path. So keep that in mind. All right. I think that brings us to the end here. Next time, we're going to be back talking about a conversation I'm sure everyone's also very interested in. The chapter is called Measure Performance to Improve Performance. And so we're going to be covering metrics and what's important, maybe what's not so important. And I'm sure people are going to be wanting to tune into that one. So make sure you are subscribed on YouTube, on your podcast aggregator, or wherever you like to listen to Blueprint. And we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our authors for joining us again, and we will see you on the next episode of Blueprint. Bye, everyone.